Okay, I'm just going to do a very quick tutorial about how to bring in trees and people as well, but mainly trees, and how to make them look convincing. Now, if you're trying to bring people or trees or any other object into Photoshop, you can obviously just go get an image or take an image of yourself or your friends or whatever, and then bring it into Photoshop and cut the figures out that you want. But there is a much easier way of doing it. So what I'm going to do is demonstrate that. I'm going to do two things: how to bring in trees and people without any background, and the second thing I'm going to do is just show you a very quick way of making a shadow. These aren't the only ways of doing these things by any means, but they're very convenient if you're in a rush. Okay, the first thing I'm going to do is, just to give us a bit of background, is I'm going to find a wall. So I just looked up a stone wall for Photoshop. If you type in anything for something like stone wall for Photoshop or anything for Photoshop, you'll frequently get a flat, straight on image like this, because there's so many people using Photoshop looking for these kinds of images that there's tons of them. So we choose this one here. I choose image, copy image, then I go into Photoshop and press paste. Up it comes. Wouldn't mind it being a little bit bigger. The resolution of this image and how it appears, how realistic it is of no consequence. I'm just using it now for the purposes of an exercise. So press enter to say I like where it is, and then I'm going to click on it again and bring the fill down, way down, so it doesn't look so strong. Now if I want to bring a tree in here and have it so that it looks like it's standing with the wall in the background, I could of course take a photograph of a tree and edit that in Photoshop. But the problem with trees in particular is that there's so many leaves that it's very difficult for you to go around and trace out each leaf. And also there are gaps between leaves where you can see the sky or the background or a building, and that's a really, really difficult thing to do, is to clear all of that. So the easiest way to go about getting a tree you can work with is to type in tree transparent background Photoshop, and a bunch of images. Then choose images. A bunch of images like this will show up, because there are loads of companies and third-party developers out there who just have loads and loads of these images. Now when you see that little checkerboard pattern, that means that this is an image that it's in its original form doesn't have a background. So now I've done this already. So what I did was I selected this image of this tree that I like. Now it's not the image itself I'm after. I'm not just going to click on it and choose copy image. I want the file, because the file is a PNG file, and in the PNG file it only has the information to do with the tree and not with the background. So what I would do is click on it, it takes me to a site, this is top PNG, and download the image. So I download the image without any background. Okay, now I've done this already. So I go back to my little my wall, and here's my tree. I bring in my tree over here. There it goes. I'm just going to press enter to say, yeah, I like where it is. And I'm going to bring it down to where I want it to be. Now, before I do that, I'm going to call this wall, because I always name my layers. I'm going to call this tree. Always name the layers, because that way you always know exactly what it is you're manipulating. I want the tree on top, because when I select it, that's the one I want to be able to move around and do things with. If I had the wall on top, the wall would be the thing that would automatically move or whatever. Okay, so I have the tree. Now what I want to do with the tree is, this is another trick we haven't done so far. It's just very, very basic manipulation of the image. I'm going to go to image, adjustment. In this case, I'm going to choose brightness and contrast. I'm going to bring the contrast way up, and I'm going to bring the brightness a little bit up. Okay, so as you can see there, I've got a brighter looking tree, it's more green. I'll go back in, and there's something else that I tend to do quite a bit is I'll change the hue and saturation. So I bring the saturation, I could bring the saturation up and make it look more summer-like or spring-like. But yeah, we'll just leave it like that for now. So now I've got a more vibrant tree. Now, I want this tree to have a shadow. So there's loads of different ways we can do shadows on Photoshop, and some of them are very efficient and some of them are technical and they'll be technically correct and all that kind of thing. But this is just a real fast one for when you know you've got a presentation the next day and you just don't have time to waste. This is the way I do it. I'll choose tree, I'll choose duplicate layer, and it'll duplicate the layer. Now, sorry, I'm just getting some pop-ups here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one shadow. Now here's something that I have to do. Because I imported this as a PNG file without any background, I have to do something which I won't get into the technicalities of, but it's important to remember. I have to rasterize this layer. Okay, it has to become a raster. Now I'm going to choose the shadow and I'm going to bring it across and bring it down a little bit. Let's say to about there. And I'm going to bring it underneath the tree layer because I want it to be behind it. So now it's underneath the tree layer. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to, making sure that my black color swatch has been selected, I'm going to go to the paint bucket, and now making sure the shadow is selected, I'm just going to hit this a few times. It's not very technical and it might not be the purest way of doing it, but it sure is effective. Now I'm sure there's a few green pixels in there somewhere, but if I've got a presentation tomorrow, the studio staff aren't going to notice. So I'm going to go back up to opacity here and bring it down, and as you can see now it looks a little bit like a shadow. Now here's the handy thing, because I imported a PNG file without a background, with a transparent background, it means that I have accurate looking shadows. It looks like the sun is passing through the gaps between the leaves, and it also means that I can see the wall very clearly behind the tree without me having to do anything. Now if you go on the internet and you search around, you'll find PNG files for just about every species of tree you're looking for, so you can be really pretty accurate about the conditions on your site. Okay, so there's one other thing I'll just do, and then this will be the end of this tutorial, is that obviously if you want to bring a person in, as I said, you could take a photograph of somebody and then bring it into photograph and cut around that person using one of the clipping tools. But a much faster way is to go to the internet and to find somebody by typing in people for photograph, transparent background. That's the way I normally do it. That way I'll always get what I want. And then instead of copying the image of this gentleman here using his phone, I won't copy the image. I'll actually go to the site and download that file, because it's not the image I'm after, it's the actual file without the background that I'm after. Okay, now as it happens, I've downloaded this gent. Go back to my photograph in my picture in Photoshop, and I'm going to bring him in. And here he is. I place him. I'm happy enough with where he's placed. He's a bit on the tall side, so we'll bring him down somewhere about right relative to the tree. Click enter. That means he's in the right place, and I'm free to move on and do other things. Okay, now the gentleman here is the second file. It's the second layer down. I'll bring him to the top. So now he's on top. Now I'm going to duplicate him. So there he is duplicated. Now the second upmost of those layers, the one just slightly below, I'm going to go rasterize, because remember we must rasterize the layer. So what he's done is I'm going to rasterize both layers here just in case as I'm clicking on them it gets confused. So they're both rasterized layers. And the bottom one I'm going to call man shadow. So that's the shadow. Remember, it has to be rasterized. When I bring in a PNG file or a file typically that isn't JPEG or TIFF, it'll frequently ask me to rasterize it in order for me to be able to manipulate it or to do things with it. So man shadow, go over, making sure my black swatch is selected here. Go up to my paint bucket, and here I'll just okay, he's shadowy enough, and I'm going to bring the fill down, or maybe the opacity down a bit, and now I've got a wall and a fairly convincing looking tree, a person, and shadows. That's the easiest way to do it if you're working architecturally, because a lot of the time when we're putting things into sections we have to do things by eye, and we don't have the time to be able to do things absolutely technically correctly. We just have to give the effect or the sense that something, a tree or a person, is standing with a wall or a surface behind them, and we have to very quickly give that to give that sense of space by dropping a shadow. I find that's the best way to do it.